Welcome to Green Building Matters, the podcast that matters for green building professionals. Learn insight in green buildings as we interview today's experts in LEED and WELL. We'll learn from their career paths, war stories, and all things green, because green building matters. And now our host, and yes, he has every LEED and WELL credential. Here's Charlie Cicchetti.
Be sure to check out the Green Building Matters community, where you can have unlimited exam prep for any of the professional credential exams you're tackling next, as well as putting your continuing education on autopilot, saving time with GBS reporting your hours on your behalf. Check it out, gbes.com/join. Now, enjoy this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. I'm your host, Charlie, and today I'm joined by Mark Loeffler. He's here in the New York City area, but we want to find out how he got from Texas all the way to the Big Apple, more about his lighting experience and the fact that he's a LEED fellow. Mark, welcome to the show.
Well, Charlie, thanks a lot. Happy to be here.
Yeah, we've been talking a little bit. I can't wait to get into your story. And I always like to say, take us back. So, where'd you grow up and where'd you go to school?
Well, I grew up in Austin, Texas, back when it actually was weird in the 60s and 70s. Started my career thinking I was going to be a novelist, English major at the University of Texas, but found myself the assistant lighting designer for Austin Ballet Theater, which performed at Armadillo World Headquarters, which was kind of the Fillmore of the Southwest.
Okay.
Became a stagehand, a production manager, and theatrical lighting designer. Finished my degree in humanities and contemporary literature, but really focused on lighting design as a career. I did some graduate work at the University of Texas. I had a name for myself, but my wife was finishing her degrees in theater history and library science and got a job at Yale University. So in 1987, both of us being, native Austinites, or at least she is. I moved to Austin when I was 3 weeks old, so she holds that over my head. But I grew up there. We both moved in our early 30s to New Haven, Connecticut, where she went to work for Yale University. And then I finished my graduate work, Master's of Fine Arts at Parsons School of Design in New York, which was the only place, I think, in the world at that time offering a master's degree in architectural lighting design. Then I went to, I went to work for a woman named Hayden McKay Lighting Design, who had just started her own firm doing really integrated daylighting and architectural lighting. And that's where I really got involved in energy efficiency and sustainable lighting design back in the really late 80s, early 90s, well before LEED. We worked on things like the Federal Energy Management Program and the Federal Relighting Initiative, writing design guidelines for federal buildings. And Hayden was instrumental in some of the legislation at the time having to do with the Energy Policy Act as it pertains to lighting equipment. And I was involved in some of that policy writing as well. But through that experience, I became a Green Lights Surveyor Ally, which was an EPA program that preceded LEED. And then as soon as LEED was coming on the horizon, I took one of the first courses offered in the Northeast. Actually, Rob Watson was my teacher. And then as soon as the LEED version 1 test was available, I took it. I passed it. I was real happy. It only took me one shot. And now that would have been about early 2000 when I did that. And then a LEED accredited professional ever since, and became a fellow just a few years ago.
Yeah, well, congrats on the LEED fellow. I mean, that's such an accomplishment. And we're going to talk more about achievements in a minute. Let's talk about sustainability. So you said energy efficiency first. And a lot of people sometimes forget that lighting in our buildings is sometimes the biggest energy hog. So obviously that was a good transition for you. But, did you have an aha moment? Like, I want to make a career out of sustainability or a career in lighting? I mean, when, was there a moment there you're like, I'm going down this path?
Well, the transition or the conversion from theatrical lighting design to architectural was actually pretty easy, in that theatrical lighting design, which I became very efficient at and fond of, and it's the way I made my living for about 12 years, has to do with controlling the perception of space and driving the narrative, serving the director's vision with light that's has directionality and color and intensity and diffuse or clear qualities. So those same notions apply to light in buildings. It's just that you don't have an audience sitting in a chair. You've got people actually moving through space and through buildings. So it's still about the human visual experience. And I was really pleased that I was able to make that transition, both academically and professionally. But I think my aha moment was understanding that light is this natural phenomenon and people respond to it in different ways, and that the combination or the integration of natural and artificial, or daylighting and electric lighting, really was where I found my niche. And a lot of that is attributable to what I learned working with Hayden, but it was also, that was my thesis topic. And I put a lot of effort into that. And that's where I have been, most successful in my sustainability career, is applying some of that to a bigger approach to light as not just a system in buildings, or not just a consumer of energy, but as a design, a framing tool for how you approach the design and execution of buildings.
Thanks for connecting the dots there, Mark. That just makes sense now. And so let's talk mentors. You mentioned the lighting design firm where you got your start. Is there anyone else that might have opened some doors for you along the way?
Well, I worked for Hayden McKay for several years, but then in around 93, early 90s, I had been commuting from New Haven, Connecticut to New York City on a pretty much daily basis for 6 or 7 years. And anybody that's listening has done that on a routine basis, you have my sympathy, because it's pretty grueling. And this is in the days before laptops and cell phones. So I was, reading professional magazines and trying to mark up drawings, on Metro North, which isn't an easy thing to do. Met up with a guy named Howard Brown, who had at the time a consulting firm called RPM Systems, Resource Planning and Management, that he had started really about 10 years before, in the 70s, early 80s, after he had spent a good part of his early career working for Buckminster Fuller. So Howard was a really important figure and continues to be an important friend. We've really worked together and done presentations even at Greenbuild regarding the dematerialization of buildings and how we can do better with less, really building on the Buckminster Fuller legacy and some of those same ideas, but applying them to more current urgencies that have to do with making better, leaner, greener, cleaner buildings.
Yeah.
Howard was a major influence and gave me the opportunity to practice lighting design as part of this larger approach to early sustainable design, environmental management systems for corporations. We were doing energy audits for state buildings in Connecticut, writing new guidelines for utility programs that really were some of the underpinnings of what turned into the sustainability movement, even before we were really commonly using the words sustainable design.
Right. Sustainability, sustainable design, green building movement, as I like to call it. And you've had quite a career here. So let's talk about some achievements. It's okay to look back on the highlight reel, so to speak. What stands out, Mark? What are some of your proudest achievements?
Well, I've had the privilege of working on lots and lots of notable buildings. I guess since the early 2000s, I've worked, because I'm here in New Haven, and I was involved in the early stages of Yale University's sustainability programs that then became assignments to be a consultant on their lead buildings, starting with the very first one that was a chemistry research building that we managed to save 29% energy and get it to LEED Silver, which gave them the encouragement to make LEED Silver their minimum, and a few years later, LEED Gold is their minimum for large capital projects. And so over the years, I've managed to work on nearly 100 different projects for Yale University of every shape and size, including a brain museum, which was their first all LED or nearly all LED project that ultimately won a prize. The Illuminating Engineering Society awarded it the Sustainability Project of the Year for illuminating 400 jars of human brains floating in formaldehyde as the visual centerpiece for them. So not everybody's gotten to light a whole bunch of brains, and you don't do it all by yourself. I was at that point the director of the New Haven office of Atelier 10, which is engineering, sustainability, and lighting design firm with offices in the U.S. and around the world. And so by 2006, I was the director of the New Haven, founding director of the New Haven office. And so that one got to be part of the design team that executed that really very interesting and very creepy project that's mostly popular around Halloween.
Good place to host your Halloween party. So,
but I will say, before I leave off, I just found out that one of my favorite little projects, not that little, but the Frick Environmental Center in Pittsburgh has just been named one of the AIA Committee on the Environment Top 10 buildings. So worked on that one as part of the Atelier 10 team with Bolin Sawinski Jackson and the city of Pittsburgh. It was a labor of love, and we saw it through to LEED Platinum and this honor from the AIA. So I'm very happy about that.
A big, huge congrats. And for those listening, make sure you're looking up these projects, some fantastic projects. Well, Mark, take us to today. You spent a lot of time at Atelier 10 and really become the guy in lighting and sustainable design. So just, let's talk a little bit about what you're doing today. And then I want to break down maybe some things we don't know about lighting design. So anything you're working on today?
Yes. Early last year, early 2018, I'm out on my own. I parted ways with Atelier 10 and started Mark Loeffler Design Consulting, and I've been working in close partnership with an engineering firm, AKF Group, and its lighting design studio, Lightcraft. And that's been a lot of fun, gives me a lot more flexibility, and I still am working on some really interesting projects in mostly the Northeast. Right now, let's see, today I was helping with a workshop for the Southern Connecticut State University School of Business, which, while they're probably not going for LEED, they are seeking to be a net zero energy building. So working with the facilities folks, people from the state of Connecticut who are enthusiastic about this goal, and the faculty group, helping them really understand fundamentally how we're going to design with nature and use passive systems to the greatest extent we can before we then get into the renewable energy strategies that'll help offset the energy that they will consume. That one's due to be built by end of 2021. I'm also working on a Discovery Center, essentially a children's nature exhibit center, but it's also going to be used for community gatherings in Mill River Park in Stamford, Connecticut. That's a fun one. And pursuing LEED, targeting gold for that one. And I've got a couple of corporate projects tend to be a bit confidential, but both of these are for organizations that are pretty progressive and have challenged us to design toward both LEED Gold aspirations and WELL Building Standard certification. So those two things will be a lot of fun. And my experience with corporate clients is once they make a decision, then they usually go through with it.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's different goals they're trying to achieve, not just on the real estate level, people, productivity, and the wellness movement definitely has shined. I got to go there, shine some light on the work you do. So photometrics, when you need that versus a daylight model, for those listening that maybe you've got some lead experience, we want our energy models, we want our buildings to be super energy efficient. And sometimes we'll do these extra lighting models and sometimes we won't. But I think you can speak to this, Mark, is really pushing our light quality even more. So tell us a little bit more about when do you do these more advanced lighting studies and models?
Well, it's a good question because I first and foremost encourage clients to really think about how they want to navigate visually through their buildings. What are the key tasks? Where are the spaces and the surfaces that deserve emphasis in the visual hierarchy? So I really try to start with the consideration of the visual experience that we're trying to create and break it down into, colors and textures and reflectivity, because it's the way people approach and navigate through space, and then the kinds of work that they need to do that then dictate the amount or the type of lighting that I might be applying to either to the building on the outside or inside within the building in the interior to make sure that all of those key visual tasks and experiences have been considered. Now, these days I am lucky that there are computer programs, ways to very accurately model the illuminance, the light that strikes a surface, and luminance, the light that is reflected from the surface, which is how we see, so that I can do that iterative modeling, but it's always design first, then analyze. It's using your own inspiration or desires and inspiration of your client to make sure that you really understand what you're trying to accomplish and then use computer tools to evaluate whether or not you're getting to those light levels and, whether you want it to be uniform or non-uniform. Actually, I'm a big fan of asymmetric or non-uniform lighting because it's just more visually interesting. But we can also use some of those same tools to evaluate the daylighting contribution, daylighting being a very dynamic source of light, depending on, yes, we can predict where the sun will be in the sky given the time of day, the day and the year and the orientation, but trying to predict that range as it filters through clouds or, there's all sorts of dynamics that are, again, we can quantify them with models, but the best thing is for people to be drawing on their own visual experience and visual vocabulary, so that some folks are partial to bright, sunny days and others would prefer to be in a Seattle cloudy day. So being able to quantify these design inspirations is wonderful. And then now that we're working with solid state LED technology that gives us the ability to readily do dimming, program it to be responsive to daylight quantity and even to tunable white to shift the tonality of white light through the course of the day. These are amazing new tools that are really becoming part of the lighting designer's toolbox.
You get a lot more tools. Let me ask one more follow-up question there. When I teach a well class, I joke, and I need you to tell me if I'm saying this right, that that blue light we get, fluorescent light, it's tricking our body, circadian rhythm, right? If it's 8 o'clock at night, we're working late on a project, our body might think it's noon and not realize it's about time to rest. We need that kind of orange hue. So I think we get circadian rhythm a little bit, but is it safe to say that the future of lighting is going to go to not just LED, but fully dimmable? It's really going to change. Is it hues throughout the day? Like, fast forward, and that's my next question. If you had a crystal ball, what's next in this green building movement? But maybe you could start it with the future of lighting. Like in the next 5 years, what kind of lighting are we going to see in some of our spaces?
Well, I would predict that tunable white will begin to catch on, but it will depend a lot on the public's appetite for controls. One of the things that I'm continually frustrated by is that we have the ability to control color, tonality, and intensity of light, but the general public is still reluctant to have anything other than an on-off switch or at most a slider dimmer on the wall that they understand. And in other aspects of their life, they will readily adopt some cool advanced technologies that when it comes to lighting, we're still trying to figure out how to get people over the hump of just simple dimming. But once we do get there and people understand that perhaps they could even use their smartphone to control their lighting condition, the things that are out there, and I don't think too far into the future, will be tunable white lighting that's controllable just in the same way that you can, dim your task lighting up and down. And to your point about you're not telling anybody anything too outlandish, because studies by the Lighting Research Center, which they use some metrics that are a little bit different from the Well Building Standard, which focuses on melanopic lux. The general sense is that around 480 nanometers blue light triggers something in the human circadian system that can perk you up when you need to be perked up, but it can also act a little bit like caffeine for your eyeballs and keep you awake when you might want to settle down and go to sleep. So, devices like, computer screens that go to an amber color, other things that suppress the blue end of the light spectrum are being increasingly shown, at least anecdotally, to help you settle down in the same way that a dose of blue light will perk you up. So I think, my prediction is that human health is going to be a huge driver. The technology is already there. We just aren't really using it to its full potential yet. And I think that research is going to begin to help us really understand that sweet spot of how lighting and productivity and happiness and circadian health all come together. We already know some things about how health can positively or negatively affect patients suffering from dementia, Alzheimer's, certain other mental illnesses. That's well-established science. We're still in the exploration period, but I think getting close to a better understanding of how light affects healthy people and what does that mean for our buildings.
Yeah, I know there's a big push on the school front, K through 12 as well. Just to follow up, anything else you think, Mark, we should be reading up on the green building movement? What's coming at us, even if it's 5 or 10 years from now? Any quick thoughts on what else we should be paying attention to?
Well, certainly, research into lighting and human health is, I think, a big thing for us to all stay tuned about, because I think the entire sustainability profession is moving toward how do we create buildings that are highly and quantifiably resource efficient, but also healthy for humans, healthy for the planet, and then resilient. I think that we'll also begin to see more and more lighting technologies that are perhaps, direct, DC current or self-illuminating, photoluminescent. We may see lighting sources that are more not just biophilic, but biomimicry. There may be, I'm predicting that there will be technologies that at least provide life safety lighting power-free. And you can already look around and find photoluminescent and reflective materials and surfaces that are being integrated into landscapes, and they're novelties, but I think we may eventually see some of that come into play.
That's fantastic. Well, clearly you're a lighting expert, but beyond that, if we were to ask those in your circle, maybe some colleagues, maybe some friends, what's your gift? What are you really good at?
I can pretty much engage any client group, user group by, try to get them excited about what does it mean to design with nature, to really think about sustainability for buildings in ways that aren't about deprivation, but about the joy of being in a place that is exciting and fresh and healthy and a building to be proud of. I get called on a lot to be the sustainability cheerleader, just like I was this morning for that Southern Connecticut State University project.
Yeah, no, fantastic. You need that encourager, someone to share the vision, and you've got some calm confidence there. Well, let's talk about some best practices, some routines, some pro tips. What do you do maybe day to day that helps you stay on point, helps you stay successful?
Keep a list. Make sure that you know what you need to do. You prioritized it. I get a lot of pleasure out of checking things off my list. If I was going to give an emerging professional any good advice, it would be make sure you know what needs to get done. And then the list will also help you understand that not everything has to get done. Not everything has the same urgency. And that, there's always going to be something left undone, and you got to learn to live with that too.
Yeah. Sage advice there. I love it. I'm a fan of the bucket list. So what one or maybe on your bucket list?
Well, one of them was to go to Japan, but I got a chance to do that just a few weeks ago. And that was fantastic to experience that culture and actually speak at a conference there. So that was something I checked off. But I think it's my bucket list is always going to be going new places and experiencing new things. So I still haven't made it to South America yet. I definitely need to get to Australia and New Zealand, and I'd love to get to Tasmania because it just sounds like it would be fun. But for me, it's finding the time and the opportunity to go places and experience different cultures and different aspects of nature. I'm a bird watcher too, so that's always fun to haul around my binoculars and my bird book and point up in the sky and have everybody else look around and say, "What are you looking at?" More travel and more birding. That's on my bucket list.
There's a lot of great places I'm sure you can do your bird watching, and it just keeps you connected in nature. So I admire that. Well, let's talk about books and learning. We're all busy professionals. Do you like to listen to books on like audio? Do you like to pick up a hard copy? If you were to have the time to read or listen to a book, is there anything you'd recommend maybe you've read recently or a classic?
Well, I'll tell you, I am a very visual person. And because I originally thought I was going to be the great American novelist, I love to have a book in my hands and to read it in a very traditional and conventional way. I don't think I've ever listened to a book all the way through. It's just, I'm too easily distracted orally, but I can lose myself in a book visually. So, I was kind of prepared for the question. I'd say one book that I've recently reread, and was to get myself ready to talk at this conference in Japan about the responsibilities of the new lighting designer, is Buckminster Fuller's Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth. I think every building professional ought to read that. And it was recently reissued by his grandson, Jaime Snyder, a couple years ago. I picked it up at a bookstore in London and I've reread it a couple of times since I originally read it maybe 25 years ago when I first started working for Howard Brown, who had worked for Buckminster Fuller, and said, "Here, read this book."
Great advice. We're going to put a link to that book in the show notes. And, Mark, my last question is, you've made a career out of the green building movement. You continue on that front. Any more advice for someone that's either jumping in right now, or maybe they've been in it for a little while and they need that second spark? So any advice here, any words of encouragement?
Well, I think anybody who wants to be a good professional just has to exercise some patience and persistence and responsiveness, to be able to listen and assimilate what you're hearing and then react or respond to that appropriately. Those are just sort of personal attributes that I think serve all of us well. But when it comes to the green building movement, to sustainable design, I find people who succeed the most have a very broad vision, a sense of curiosity, and an optimistic outlook, but a broad vision balanced with a really specific focus on some aspect that they can have a general outlook, but be an expert in some way about some aspect of what we do. In my case, it's lighting design. It's my specific focus. But when it comes to anything that has to do with designing with nature, I'm going to be there, reading it, whether it's in a magazine or a newspaper or a website, or it's just in my nature to try to accumulate that knowledge and connect it. But as you can tell, I can bring everything back around to lighting design if I need to.
Yeah, no, I think it's sometimes overlooked. You're one of a few that really specialize at the level you do. And so, Mark, I just want to say thanks for being on the podcast. Lead fellow, true lighting guru here, and really big fan of the green building movement. So, Mark, thanks so much.
You're very welcome, Charlie. It's a pleasure.
I just want to say thank you to our loyal listeners. We actually are celebrating over 1 year here on the Green Building Matters podcast. Me and the entire team were stoked and just so glad you continue to listen every Wednesday morning to a new interview with a green building professional here in this industry, or just some pro tips that we want to make sure that you are getting straight from us, straight to you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At gbes.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode. And you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.